I walked beside Ethan through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors and into Lauren and Daniel's wedding reception with a feeling so familiar it had become unbearable, like putting on a shirt that had been too tight for years and still forcing a smile, still saying everything was fine. The place was beautiful enough to make people lower their voices the moment they entered. Golden light spilled over tables dressed in white flowers, and the soft clink of glasses drifted through the room like a carefully arranged sound meant to remind everyone they were part of an important evening. I had been ready to let myself enjoy it, at least a little. Lauren was an old friend. The gift I brought was anything but careless, and officially, at least, Ethan and I were here as an ordinary married couple attending a wedding. But for Ethan, crowded rooms were always a stage. He had a gift for picking the exact right moment to say something that sounded weightless and still made the person across from him shrink. I knew that because I had been the one forced to laugh things off too many times. The hostess at the check-in table looked up, gave us a polite smile, and asked for our names. I had barely parted my lips when Ethan beat me by half a second. He rested one hand on the edge of the table, his tone so casual it sounded as if he were only helping things move along more smoothly. Ethan Cole. She's just the driver who brought me. The sentence was short, neat, not raised in volume, not openly aggressive. That was exactly why it stung. It didn't hit me like a slap. It was sharper than that, like a thin blade skimming across skin before the pain catches up, and only a second later do you realize you've been cut. I stood still for exactly one beat, just one. Then I smiled and set the gift box down on the check-in table with such care that it looked as though my only concern was making sure the ribbons stayed perfectly straight. I didn't ask him to repeat himself. I didn't look at him. And I didn't rescue him by pretending to pick up the joke and soften it into something harmless. The reaction came quickly. Small, yes, but enough for anyone who had ever been diminished in public to recognize it instantly. The hostess's smile changed. Still polite, but no longer equal. Her eyes passed over me the way they would over someone tagging along, not a real guest. Two guests standing behind us glanced my way, the kind of quick look people give before turning away, but long enough to confirm the new place Ethan had assigned me in front of strangers. He noticed it too, so he added another laugh right away. His tone sharpened with that self-satisfied rhythm meant to suggest he had just delivered a clever little line. To outsiders, it might have sounded like harmless charm. To the person it was aimed at, it was something you had to swallow along with your own self-respect. This was not the first time. Ethan had a very particular talent. He knew how to belittle me while keeping his manners immaculate. If I reacted, he would tilt his head, sigh, and ask in a patient voice why I always had to make everything so serious. If I stayed silent, he treated that silence as permission to keep going. Over the years, he had trained me into a role. The woman who cleaned up the damage behind him, adjusted the wording, patched the impression, protected the family's dignity, then stepped out of the light at exactly the right moment so his success could look cleaner, more self-made. Ethan liked being seen as the man who built everything himself. He liked telling the story of his life in a way that made everyone believe his intelligence and confidence were all he had ever needed. In that story, I existed like a faded footnote, useful when necessary, invisible when he wanted to shine more brightly. I was used to having my name cut away from the work I had done, but I had never felt it as clearly as I did that night, in a room where I had every real reason to be. When the staff member got ready to print name tags, Ethan leaned forward again and volunteered a few more details about his work, skipping right over my name as if my presence were nothing more than an accessory that came with the car keys. I watched the hostess's hand pause for half a second over the stack of tags. At that same moment, from across the hall, I caught Lauren turning her head in our direction. Her face faltered for just an instant. She knew me. More than that, she knew exactly why I was there. But another group of guests was pulling her back, and in those few brief seconds, I understood something that sent a chill up my spine. Ethan had not misspoken. He was deliberately erasing my real role from an event directly tied to the gift I had brought. I looked at the gift box resting on the table, then at Ethan smiling and shaking hands with someone else, as if he had done nothing wrong. And for the first time in years, a question rose in my mind, sharp and impossible to push away. If the truth came out tonight, who, exactly, would be the one left with nowhere to stand? I used to think the most painful thing in a marriage was the big fights, the cruel words thrown out in anger, the nights spent back to back with neither person willing to give in. Later, I realized the thing that wears a person down fastest is being erased little by little, your contribution rubbed out steadily, like water dripping through stone. Not loud, not dramatic at first, but enough that one day, when you look back, you realize you've been pushed out of a story you helped write. In those early years, Ethan had nothing to his name but a few unfinished plans and a confidence far bigger than his actual ability. His work was so unstable back then that one month he'd have a contract, and the next he'd spend a whole week at the dining table staring at his computer screen as if he looked long enough, opportunity might appear on its own. I was the one who kept that house from tipping into chaos. I stretched every dollar, cut anything unnecessary, took on extra work, and still came home at night and sat beside him, editing his emails, shaping his words so he sounded sharper, calmer, more credible. In those first meetings with potential partners, I was the one reminding him what to say, what not to say, when to pull back, and when to lean in. One time, someone refused to meet with Ethan because his portfolio was too thin. I was the one who called back and used my own reputation to secure him the chance to sit down and talk. I'm not saying any of this to demand credit. Back then, I did it because I believed in my husband. I believed that if someone is loved the right way, at the hardest point in their life, they will remember the hand that helped them back to their feet. But Ethan did not remember in the way I once hoped he would. The deeper he moved into those polished circles full of unspoken rules and delicate egos, the more he learned to retell his journey as a story of personal conquest. At first, he still mentioned me. Then gradually, my role shrank into one short line. My wife helped with a few small things now and then. A few small things. A home kept steady so he wouldn't collapse. Letters that opened the first doors for him. Relationships I vouched for with my own name. In the end, all of that became just a few small things. The bitterest part was never how hard I had worked. The bitterest part was watching that effort turn into something expected, as if I had been born to serve as his backdrop, to lift him up, and then quietly step into the dark, because that was the part I was meant to play. When I came back to the reality of the party, Ethan had already put his familiar calm expression back on that outer layer that always made strangers think he was a considerate husband. He rested a hand on the back of a chair at a smaller table near the edge of the hall and said in that half-joking, half-directing voice of his, "Why don't you sit over here for now? It's cramped over there. Besides, you don't know anyone anyway. You'll be more comfortable here." I looked at the table, then at him. He said it skillfully enough that anyone overhearing would have thought he was being thoughtful, but I knew better than anyone that this was Ethan's way, how he made someone disappear while still protecting his image as the good guy. I set down my glass of water and kept my voice so calm that even I was surprised. "Are you sure I don't know anyone here, Ethan?" The smile stayed on his mouth, but his eyes stalled for a beat. Just one very brief beat, enough for me to know the question had landed exactly where he did not want anyone touching. He tilted his head, his tone light but cold. "I just want you to feel comfortable. I have never felt out of place here," I said. "You're the one who always wants me standing outside of it." That was when Lauren came over. She hugged me quickly, but her hands tightened more than politeness required, as if there were a question inside that embrace she couldn't ask out loud. When she stepped back, her eyes flicked toward Ethan, not quite annoyed, but clearly confused. "Are you okay?" she asked me first, not Ethan. A small thing, but enough for me to notice. Before I could answer, Lauren went on, her voice lowering. "I'm really glad you came." The way she said it was not how someone thanked a husband's +1. It was how you spoke to someone who had truly been there in the hardest days of your life. Ethan cut in almost immediately. "Lauren, the bride shouldn't be worrying about other people today. Daniel's looking for you." He smiled, so polished and courteous that anyone outside the moment would have seen nothing strange. But Lauren did not look away from me right away. She only glanced at Ethan for a second, her confusion deepening, as if she could not understand why he needed to interrupt such a simple question. "You were the one who—" Lauren trailed off, then looked at me as if asking permission. "I mean, before this, my family got so much help from you. I just thought—" "Lauren," Ethan said over her, still in that velvet smooth voice, We can talk about old things later. Today is your happy day. I looked at him, then asked quietly, so quietly, only the three of us could hear. What are you afraid people will find out? Ethan didn't blink. I'm trying to help you not feel out of place. I let out the faintest laugh. I have never been out of place, Ethan. You're the one who always wants me standing outside. Lauren was silent for a few seconds. When someone passing by called for her, she shifted half a step away, then leaned back toward me discreetly, careful enough to preserve appearances. Why does Ethan want to hide the fact that you were the one who helped my family hold everything together before the wedding? The question sent a chill straight down my spine. So I had not imagined it, Lauren knew. Maybe she knew even more than I thought. And if Ethan was trying to erase my name from something even the bride clearly remembered, then whatever he was hiding tonight was bigger than the wounded pride of a man who liked being praised. I had just started to answer when, from the main table, someone raised a glass and mentioned the special gift from Ethan and his wife. And in that instant, I understood that he had already started claiming credit for something I had never given him. The gift I had set down beside the reception table at the start of the evening had never been the kind of beautifully wrapped box people would admire for a moment and forget after dinner. It was the result of a promise I had kept for the past 3 months, so quietly that even Ethan only vaguely knew I had helped with something, and he had never once been patient enough to ask what really mattered. 2 weeks before the wedding, Lauren called me, sounding close to tears. Funding for the music and the guest favors had been pulled at the last minute, the venue was pressing for confirmation, and her mother was trying to stay calm even as her voice was already giving way. It was not some frivolous concern. For Lauren's family, this wedding was the rare chance for her father, who had just survived a serious illness, to sit and watch his daughter reach this milestone whole, not pieced together, not overshadowed by the feeling that they had to cut away one part after another because they were short of money. I knew Lauren's mother had quietly sold an old set of jewelry to cover part of the cost. I also knew Lauren was ready to cancel the thank you gifts for close guests and the live band her father loved, just to preserve the bare essentials. That night, I told her not to cancel anything. I called an old contact at the community fund where I used to work, revived a sponsorship lead that had seemed long gone, and then covered the remaining gap with my own savings. So the special gift in the bride's family's name was never just money. It was a way to keep this evening from being stained by struggle. It was what allowed a family to hold on to its dignity without having to bow its head and explain itself to anyone. And most importantly, every confirmation, every exchange, every receipt had gone through me. I sat where Ethan had casually chosen to put me, off to the outer side, far enough away that anyone seeing us for the first time would have assumed I was just someone accompanying him. I did not move my chair. I did not cut into the conversation. I did not step any closer. The quieter I seemed, the more relaxed Ethan became. A few men at the table raised their glasses to him, laughing loudly, praising him for being thoughtful, well-connected, saying, "It really makes a difference when a man handles these wedding things." Ethan drank in those words like a thirsty man finding water. He nodded with practiced restraint, pretending modesty, but his eyes lit up in a way I had seen too many times before, that particular gleam he got whenever he accepted credit that did not belong to him. From that distance, I noticed something Ethan did not. Lauren thanked him with the proper politeness of a bride on her wedding day, but right after that, her eyes searched for me. Her mother did the same. She passed by my table, paused for just a beat, and rested her hand lightly on the back of mine without saying a word. But that faint pressure felt like a question held back in the middle of a crowd. They were not the sort of people who would recklessly expose someone during a celebration. And that was exactly why their silence made the air feel even tighter. Both of them knew something was off. No one was willing to be the first to pull the curtain back. I still thought I could wait a little longer until I heard Ethan talking near the bar with a group of male guests. He lowered his voice just enough to make it sound intimate, but every word was chosen carefully. He talked about the special gift, as if he had been the one who came up with the idea, the one who made the calls, the one whose name was on it, the one who handled every last-minute complication. He even added a few polished details to make the story sound more professional and more generous than it really was. Then he laughed, took a sip of his drink, and said something that turned my hands cold beneath the music. My wife? She just helped carry it in. Women like that kind of thing. It makes them feel like they contributed. The whole group laughed with him, the kind of laughter that skimmed lightly over the surface but still had enough edge to cut. I looked at Ethan then and understood with perfect clarity that this was no longer just his habit of needing the upper hand in our marriage. He was taking an act of kindness that was mine, a promise I had kept to Lauren's family, and turning it into a prop to polish his own image. If I stayed seated and said nothing, that lie would go on living in the memory of everyone in that room as a truth they had all witnessed together. I tightened my grip on my water glass until my fingers started to ache. Right then, a server leaned down beside me and lowered his voice so only I could hear. The organizers were about to begin the public thank you to the person who had sent the special gift. I looked up and caught Lauren on the stage, staring straight at me, and I knew the moment of direct collision had arrived. From the moment the gift was mentioned at the reception table, Ethan almost completely changed his expression. The open irritation he'd worn earlier in the evening disappeared, replaced by a familiar kind of warmth, the kind that only showed up when he spotted a chance to turn a situation into an advantage for himself. I stood not far from him and watched him move from table to table, wineglass in hand, smiling just enough, retelling the story of the gift, as if he were the one who had stayed up with me through the night, making calls, arranging every detail to keep Lauren's wedding from falling apart at the last minute. "My wife and I just wanted to help a little," he said, in a humility polished to perfection. On the surface, there was nothing wrong with it. What was wrong was the way he paused at exactly the right beat after the words, "my wife and I," the way he dipped his head to accept people's thanks with the calm composure of someone used to being admired, and the way he let everyone else fill in the rest on their own, that Ethan must have been the one behind most of it. I had seen that pattern too many times. An idea I proposed became, in his telling, his plan. A relationship I had nurtured became, in the way he recounted it, a door he had opened. Once, twice, then so many times it became as effortless as a reflex. What made me go cold wasn't that he was doing it again at a party. What hurt was how calmly Ethan did it, as if it had never once occurred to him that there was anything shameful about it. At the groom's family's table, he smiled again. "Good thing I managed to pull things together in time. That close to the date, everyone was under pressure." I turned to look at him. "Which part are you talking about? Ethan, the financial side, the connections, or the promise to Lauren's family?" The smile on his face faltered for the briefest second. If you weren't standing beside him, you probably wouldn't have noticed. But I did. I was always the one who saw the first cracks in his polished exterior. Ethan gave a stiff laugh. "You're making things complicated again." I kept my voice even. "I'm not making things complicated. I'm just noticing that you're telling a story where I've been erased from the things I did with my own hands." The mood around the table dipped. A few people exchanged glances. No one said anything yet, but that silence had changed. It wasn't polite silence anymore. It was the silence of people beginning to wonder what had just been left out. Right then, Michael appeared from behind us, resting a hand lightly on the back of a guest chair, as if he were just casually stepping into the conversation halfway through. Michael had worked with both Ethan and me on several community projects years ago. He was the kind of man who laughed easily and spoke half in jest, half in truth, but his eyes rarely missed anything. Hearing Ethan talk about pulling things together almost made me forget who's actually been saving every situation all these years, Michael said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Back then, whenever an event went sideways, Ethan was never the first person anyone called. Someone let out a quiet laugh. Ethan cut in immediately, so fast it was almost an interruption. "Michael always likes to exaggerate." Michael shrugged. "If it's exaggeration, then I must be remembering wrong all those times. Nora stayed until midnight, fixing guest lists, managing sponsors, and cleaning up messes other people created." I saw Ethan's jaw tighten. Once again, he looked at me with that familiar expression, half warning, half pleading, as if reminding me to play my old role, to smile, smooth it over for him, protect his image for him. I had done that for so long, he seemed to think it was my nature, not a patience that had limits. He put a hand on my elbow, gripping just lightly enough that anyone watching would mistake it for affection, and pulled me toward a corner near the hallway entrance. The moment we were out of the crowd's direct hearing range, his voice dropped and turned cold. "This is not the time for you to prove anything." I looked him straight in the eye. "Then, when is the time, Ethan?" After you've already collected all the thanks? Don't damage both our dignity. I let out a very soft laugh, so soft that even I could hear how much sharper it was than any shout. No, Ethan. What you're calling both our dignity is really just the shadow I've been standing in for you, holding up for far too long. His hand tightened for a fraction of a second, then let go, because at that exact moment the microphone echoed across the room. The host asked everyone to turn toward the stage, then cheerfully thanked Ethan and Nora for the special wedding gift that had made the evening feel even more complete than anyone had expected. The entire banquet hall turned to look at us. Polite applause broke out, but it was loud enough to make that moment feel like a public summons. Ethan's expression changed instantly. He placed a hand at the small of my back like a model husband escorting his wife to the stage. Only I knew how rigid that hand really was. I walked beside him under hundreds of eyes and understood with perfect clarity that from this moment on, either I would stand there in silence again and let someone else write a distorted version of me, or the truth would finally speak for itself. When we were invited onto the stage to receive the bride's family's thanks, I understood immediately why Ethan stepped up half a pace ahead of me. For him, a stage had always been the easiest place to breathe, because the person holding the microphone was usually the one who got to decide how the truth would be told. The lights poured down on us. The applause below had not even fully faded, and Ethan had already arranged his face into that familiar composed expression, the face of a successful, generous man, embarrassed by praise, but still very skilled at receiving admiration. He took the microphone first, smiled at Lauren's mother, then turned to the guests with that low, steady voice that had saved him more times than I could count at gatherings like this. He spoke about the joy of being part of such an important day, about how families should always support each other when it matters most, about seeing Lauren as a younger sister. Every sentence was just kind enough that no one could object, and just vague enough that anyone who did not know the truth would naturally assign the rest of the credit to him. Ethan was not exactly lying. He was simply careful to leave blank spaces where other people could misunderstand things in a way that benefited him most. I stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the podium, listening, and it felt as though I were looking back over years of making myself smaller. Every party where I stayed silent while he joked about my work in front of his friends. Every meeting with business associates where he introduced me in ways that sounded harmless on the surface, but always managed to diminish me. Every time I swallowed my irritation and told myself men had pride, I told myself every marriage needed someone who knew how to yield. I had given him too many chances to change, so many that he had started treating my patience as a built-in feature of his life. But the words, "just the driver tonight," had struck the final limit. It was no longer a careless remark I could comfort myself into overlooking. It was how Ethan saw me when he no longer felt the need to be careful, how readily he was willing to push me lower so he could stand higher in other people's eyes. Standing there on that stage, I suddenly understood something that made my whole body go cold. If I kept silent, I was not protecting this marriage. I was helping erase myself from the story of my own life. I looked down into the room. Lauren was no longer wearing that strained smile. Daniel stood beside her, quiet-eyed, but sharp. The bride's mother was sitting straighter now, her hands clasped tighter than before. Michael stood near the front row with his arms folded, no longer bothering to hide his irritation. Even some of Ethan's relatives had begun looking from him to me as though they had finally noticed that this picture was crooked. The one-sided admiration in the room was beginning to crack, slowly but unmistakably. Everyone could feel that something was wrong, and everyone was waiting to see who would be the one to tell the truth. Ethan kept talking, his tone even, his smile precise, as though another few sentences would be enough to seal this version of the truth in place in front of everyone. That was exactly how he had done it for years, not with cruelty, not with shouting, just with enough skill to make my part dissolve into his. I heard him mention the efforts of both husband and wife, heard him accept their gratitude with a measured nod, and for the first time in a very long while, I felt strangely calm. That calm did not come from surrender. It came from the moment I stopped being afraid of losing face. Because what I needed to save now was not the image of a lovely married couple in front of a crowd. What I needed to save was my self-respect, the last part of me I had not yet handed over for Ethan to spend. I reached for the microphone. Ethan faltered, just slightly, only for a beat, but I saw it clearly. He glanced at me, the polite curve of his mouth still fixed in place while his jaw had already tightened. There was that familiar warning in his eyes, the kind of look that used to be enough to make me step back half a pace so everything could stay smooth. But tonight, I did not step back. "I'd like to say a few words," I said. The entire room fell quiet almost instantly. The shift in the air was so sharp I could hear the faint clink of a glass somewhere below, and then even that stopped. I turned to face the audience, feeling Ethan beside me, losing control of a moment he had been certain was his. I tightened my grip on the microphone, looked straight toward the front row, and spoke slowly, one word at a time. "Before everyone thanks the wrong person, I think I should return this gift to its rightful owner." The noise in the room seemed to split in two. Ethan whipped around toward me. For the first time all evening, his face could no longer hide his panic. I drew in a deep breath and knew that the next sentence out of my mouth would not just expose one lie in the middle of this wedding reception, it would drag my entire marriage into the light. I didn't snatch the microphone from Ethan's hand. I simply stepped forward, laid my hand on the still warm body of the mic, looked first at Lauren's mother, then down at the rows of seats below. The entire hall fell silent almost instantly, the kind of silence that only appears when people can feel something is about to be stripped down to its core. I heard my own voice clearly, calmer than I'd expected. "I think there's something that needs to be stated correctly, right now, right here. The gift Lauren's family just mentioned was not a gift my husband was behind." Ethan turned sharply toward me. I didn't look at him right away. I kept going, point by point, as clearly as if I were reading back the file of my own life. 3 months ago, when Lauren's family ran into financial trouble in the final stage of preparing for the wedding, the first person to reach out was Diane. The person who confirmed the specific need was Lauren. The person who worked with the support fund and completed the paperwork was me. The person who covered the remaining costs and put her name behind the promise of honor attached to it was also me. I paused for a beat, long enough for everyone to understand that I was not speaking in anger. I was speaking because the time had come when ambiguity could no longer stand in the middle of the room. Dressed in good manners. My husband was not the one behind this gift. He was simply the one standing beside it, letting everyone misunderstand in a way that benefited him. A few soft intakes of breath sounded through the room, a few eyes shifting instantly from me to Ethan. The shock didn't come from volume. It came from the fact that I hadn't left any room for another interpretation. Ethan kept the smile on his face for exactly a few more seconds, and then it hardened like cracked glaze. I turned fully toward the guests, and this is not the first time that's happened. This time, I looked straight at him. For years, I've been the one behind many of the things that gave Ethan the appearance of stability everyone sees. I'm the one who patched the gaps when he handled finances carelessly. I'm the one who made the apology calls when he damaged a relationship. I'm the one who kept his name worth something in the rooms he walked into, with the confidence of a man who thought reputation grew on its own. No one interrupted me. No one could. Every time he sees me recognized the way I should be, he finds a way to make me smaller in front of a crowd. Not because I embarrass him, but because he's afraid that if I stand where I truly belong, he won't seem as tall as he thinks he is. I saw a few people below tilt their heads slightly toward one another. Scattered memories of Ethan, promises that had sounded too perfect, the times he showed up at exactly the right moment to receive praise for what someone else had quietly done, it was probably beginning to click into place in their minds. Then Lauren signaled to someone on the service staff. An envelope was brought up. Lauren's mother took it first, her hand trembling faintly, but her voice was steady. "I would like to confirm this," she said, turning toward the guests. "The person who stood by my family from beginning to end was Olivia. This is the thank you letter we wrote to her, and this is the sponsorship confirmation in her name. We kept them because we knew that help was not a social courtesy gift." Michael, standing near the foot of the stage, spoke too briefly, but sharply. "I've seen this before. Ethan always knows how to stand in the brightest spot, especially when someone else has already done the hardest part." The air in the room felt stretched so tight that the slightest touch might snap it. Ethan yanked the microphone out of my hand. The polished expression he'd worn all evening disappeared completely. "So you finally got what you wanted most," he said, his voice so cold and sharp that several people below flinched. "To humiliate me in front of a crowd. You're always like this, Olivia. You love control. You love playing the one who sacrifices. You love making everyone think you're some noble victim. I didn't cut in. I let him speak, because for the first time that night, Ethan was taking off his own mask with his own hands. You think people don't know? I didn't stay in this marriage all these years because of that deep love everyone imagines. I stayed because you needed me. You needed a husband to legitimize your perfect image. You needed me standing beside you so you'd look proper, complete, exactly the way you wanted. The room went dead silent. I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I no longer felt cornered. On the contrary, I saw a door swing open right in front of everyone. Ethan had just thrown out the thing he thought would humiliate me, when in fact it was the secret I had been waiting for him to say out loud himself. I turned fully to face him, let go of the microphone for a beat, then took it back, my calm so deep it felt cold, because I knew what came next would be the turn he could never come back from. Ethan grabbed at one last shard of truth the way a drowning man clutches at anything floating on the surface. He gave a harsh, brittle laugh, his voice off-key with rage and panic. That sounds very noble coming from you, but if I weren't the one holding this marriage's shell together for you, how do you think people would see you? You need me more than you're willing to admit. The whole wedding hall sank back into a silence, heavy as stone. This time, I turned fully to look at Ethan. I didn't cut him off, and I didn't get angry the way he expected. I just held his gaze long enough that he was the one who blinked first. Sometimes calm throws people off more than an argument ever could, because it forces them to hear every word they're about to have handed back to them. I need you, I asked softly, then answered myself. No, what I did, once, was try to keep a home from collapsing in front of other people, and preserving something is not the same thing as depending on it. I took one more step forward. I didn't raise my voice, but every word landed cleanly. For years, I was the one clearing the way for you at parties. I was the one making phone calls to apologize after you said too much to business partners. I was the one quietly covering what you promised and left unfinished. I was the one who stayed behind with the relationships you had strained, so they would still respect you. You mistook my silence for dependence only because you got used to living inside a story I let you tell. Ethan's face changed completely. The confidence he had built up from the start of the evening began to crack, piece by piece. He opened his mouth as if to cut in, but I gave him nowhere to hide. You always said you were protecting me. The truth is, you were protecting your position. What are you most afraid of, Ethan? It's not that I'm better than you. You're afraid other people will find out I'm better than the image you built of yourself. That struck the exact place he had hidden most carefully. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his hand clamped around the microphone, in the way his eyes flicked quickly over the crowd as if searching for one face that still believed him. But the room had changed now. It no longer reflected the image he wanted to see. Lauren was the first to speak. She stepped up close to the stage, her eyes red, but her voice steady. Ava, I'm sorry. I could tell something was wrong from the beginning, but I stayed quiet because I was afraid of ruining the wedding day. I should have said something sooner. Daniel stood up right after her. He looked straight at me, not at Ethan. If anyone here deserves to be thanked by name for what she actually did, it's you. My family owes you the truth. Lauren's mother, Diane, rose slowly to her feet. At her age, blunt honesty carried a different kind of weight. My family will not accept one person's kindness being claimed by someone else in front of everyone. Ava helped us with her own honor. No one has the right to twist that. I heard a few murmurs, then abrupt silence. Michael also stepped away from the cluster of guests near the bar and moved to stand below the stage, his voice firm. I've heard Ethan let people get the wrong idea more than once, but tonight is enough. A few people who had been nodding along with Ethan earlier now stepped back completely, avoiding his eyes. The social pressure he had always used so skillfully was turning on him now, slow and merciless. Ethan let out a thin laugh, the laugh of a man who knows he's losing and is still trying to cling to the last scraps of his dignity. And then what? You're going to turn someone else's wedding into your moral stage? I shook my head. No, I'm just ending a role you made me play for far too long. I bent toward the small table beside the podium. The gift box was still there, neat and understated, the way my kindness had existed in this marriage real, but rarely called by its proper name. I slipped off my wedding ring and set it down beside the box. The two objects lay next to each other like an ending that needed no extra emphasis. This gift is still from me to Lauren and Daniel because they deserve a clean beginning. I lifted my head and looked straight at Ethan. But from this moment on, I will no longer vouch for you in any personal or social relationship. This marriage, if it is to be spoken of at all, will be dealt with through the truth, not appearances. I handed the microphone back to the MC, who was standing frozen at the edge of the stage, then stepped down. The crowd parted on its own into a long aisle, so silent I could hear the click of my heels against the floor. I had only taken a few steps when Ethan's voice rang out behind me, no longer sharp, no longer arrogant. For the first time in years, I heard something real in it. Fear. Ava. Wait. I had almost reached the exit when I heard Ethan call my name from behind me. His voice was no longer sharp and booming the way it had been in the middle of the hall. It was broken now, rushed and grasping, as if I stopped for just a few more minutes, everything could still be dragged back to where it had been before. I did stop, but that was all I gave him in that moment. I did not return to my old place. I did not return to the role of the woman who was used to standing slightly off to the side so he could shine brighter. And I did not return to the silence I used to call patience. Ethan hurried over. His face had gone pale, and his eyes were full of the kind of turmoil that, in the past, would have made me soften. But tonight, I was no longer looking at him through old habits. He spoke quickly, at times blaming the pressure, at times insisting it was all just a misunderstanding, then lowering his voice and asking to speak in private, as if what he had done could somehow feel smaller once there was a closed door around it. Then, when he saw I wasn't answering, he shifted the blame. He said I had turned the party into a disaster, that I could have waited until we got home, and that I had pushed him into being humiliated in front of everyone. I listened to all of it. Strangely, I no longer felt the urge to defend myself. Once the truth has been set in its proper place, it does not need more noise to prove itself. I said only one sentence, quiet enough not to become a second scene in the hallway. I didn't embarrass you, Ethan. You did that yourself the moment you called me the driver. He froze. And for the first time, I saw a real emptiness cross his face, the emptiness of someone who has just realized the person standing in front of him is no longer afraid. Back inside the hall, Lauren had stepped forward with Daniel. I had no intention of going back, but Lauren's voice carried clearly enough that the whole space behind me seemed to fall still. She publicly thanked me again, and this time it was no longer just social politeness. Lauren said plainly that she was sorry for letting me be placed in a hurtful situation on her family's happy day. Daniel made it clear, as well, that the gift was from me, that the help had come from me at exactly the right time, and that my name should have been mentioned with gratitude from the very beginning, not used by someone else as a backdrop for a story about himself. I turned to look back, not to take in a victory, but to witness someone choosing to correct what was wrong the moment they recognized it. From the front row, Diane gave me a small nod, her eyes full of regret. It was such a simple gesture, but it was enough to return me to my rightful place, not as someone's shadow, but as a person who deserved respect. And Ethan stood a few steps away from me in silence. I knew the consequences of tonight would not arrive like a lightning strike. They would come in the form of looks that had changed, phone calls that would sound less warm, people who had just been praising him beginning to ask who he really was. The image he had worked so hard to build had cracked, and cracks like that cannot be hidden forever behind polished words. But more importantly, I had to face the part of this that was my own mistake, too. I used to think silence was love, that giving in was maturity, that forcing myself to protect my husband's image was how you held a family together. I was wrong. A marriage cannot be saved by one person becoming smaller and smaller so the other can seem bigger. My boundaries should have been drawn a long time ago, before they were bargained away again and again. I went back to the table near the stage and set the gift down where it belonged, neat and final. For the first time in many years, I was no longer carrying the responsibility of protecting the image of someone who had erased me again and again. Then I walked out. The air outside was much cooler than it had been in the wedding hall. The music, the clink of glasses, the murmur of people talking, all faded behind me like a distant tide. I stood still for a few seconds in the parking lot, took a long, deep breath, and realized the smile on my lips was no longer a shell to cover my exhaustion. It was the feeling of becoming lighter after finally setting down a burden I had carried for far too long. There would still be things ahead to deal with: paperwork, difficult conversations, days of pain after a mask had just shattered. I had no illusion that after one night, everything would suddenly become easy, but I knew my life would be truer from here on. I would step into the next part of it with clearer boundaries, with my self-respect restored to its proper place, and with the peace that comes from no longer betraying myself. I walked toward my car, listening as the noise of the party slowly dissolved behind me, and I understood one thing with perfect clarity. Tonight, I was not just leaving a terrible party behind, I was leaving behind the version of myself that had grown used to enduring.